Well, I think we'll get started. Welcome to today's webinar on Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's Art Project and Art Legacy Project grants for fiscal year 2019. I am Carolyn Koska, the Financial and Grants Administrator for Southwest Minnesota Arts Council. You can type in questions in the chat window during the presentation, and I will watch that and try and answer those questions as they come up, and I'll unmute you all at the end of the presentation, and you'll have a chance to talk with me then and get any more questions answered. Today we will briefly talk about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, and I'll go through the guidelines for our art project and art legacy project grant programs. We'll take a look at our online grant system and the application form for these grant programs, and then just look at some grant writing tips and the grant process that you'll go through. So we'll get started and talk a little bit about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, which is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services, which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor and/or create and promote the arts in their communities. So this is the region that we cover. And our funding for these grant programs comes from the state of Minnesota through the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund, and also through the State General Fund. SMOC is committed to supporting artists and arts organizations in creating, producing, and presenting high-quality arts activities, overcoming barriers to accessing high-quality arts activities, instilling the arts into the community and public life, supporting high-quality, age-appropriate arts education for all ages to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding of the arts, and supporting events and activities that represent the diverse ethnic and cultural arts traditions of the region, including folk and traditional artists and arts organizations. So these are things to keep in mind when you're thinking of projects that you would like to do, to make sure that your projects also support these activities. The Art Project Grant Program is open to nonprofit organizations and also units of government, which would be cities, counties, in the 18 counties of the SMOC service region, to stimulate and encourage the creation, performance, and appreciation of the arts in the region. So these projects can include, but are not limited to, music performances, which could include projects by community choirs, bands, or orchestras, dance performances, community theater, or prepackaged theater, which would be groups like Prairie Fire or Missoula Children's Theaters coming in. And these performances, music, dance, theater performances, could also be performances that are brought in by the community. They don't have to be put on by the community. Visual art exhibits, readings by authors, art classes for community members of all ages, public art, arts festivals. Art project grants are available for up to $7,000. That has been increased this year. Unless you're doing a prepackaged theater project, those are available for up to $2,500. And both of those are available for up to that amount or 80% of the project's cost, whichever is less. So you'll need to provide at least a 20% cash match toward the project. If you are receiving an operating support grant, you cannot include prorated operating costs in the budget for your grant. If you're looking at doing an art legacy project, those would be the same types of projects, but they would be a large scale project that will leave an arts legacy in Southwest Minnesota. So an arts legacy project should provide sustainable arts access in the community with a continuing impact over several years. And the arts legacy project should go beyond the organization's regular arts programming. So for instance, if your organization normally puts on community theater, you couldn't just do a more expensive community theater production as an art legacy project. It would have to be something that would go above and beyond your normal programming. What we normally see for requests in this program are public art projects. We've gotten requests for year-long community festivals celebrating an artist who was based in that community. We've had place-based theater come in and do a site-specific theater project written specifically for that community. They come in and research stories about the community and write a production specifically for that community that's put on in various locations around the community, and then they have this production to put on again in the future. But mainly, people have done large public art projects under this program. It's very helpful if you're planning on doing an art legacy project to do an art legacy project planning grant first. And if you do this planning grant, it can fund activities such as doing requests for proposals from artists, gathering community input, determining available resources and costs, researching the feasibility or sustainability of the project, so you can figure out everything that you need to know going into that project ahead of time. And applications for those planning grants are due the first of each month, August through November and January through April. And that just gives you kind of a head start in your planning for those really large scale projects. So the art legacy projects are available for up to $25,000 or 80% of the costs, and those planning grants $2,500 or 80% of the costs. So again, your organization would need to come up with at least a 25% cash match toward that project. Any questions so far? I haven't seen anything come through yet on the chat window. So for both of those programs, as far as eligibility, the following are not eligible. Projects that don't have an art focus, activities of a for-profit project, organization, or business, educational projects within a school system. We have a separate program for schools, requiring artists to pay excessive entry or exhibition fees, activities that take place outside of Minnesota, activities that are not open to the public, activities for the religious socialization of the participants or audience, fundraising events. In other words, the grant funding should allow your project to break even. So it's one thing if you would all of a sudden sell a whole lot more tickets to your project than you expected, and you make a lot more money than you expected, that's great. But on the other hand, if after you get the grant, you decide, oh, we're gonna only spend half of what we said on advertising, and we're just gonna keep the rest of this money, that you can't do. So we really want you to just be able to break even on your project. You also cannot pay for debts incurred before the grant begins, so you can't have started a project and run out of money and then apply for a grant to kind of finish it up. You can't use grant funds as a match for another SMOT grant, and we can't fund applicants with past due final reports. So these are some of the guidelines here, but make sure to check all of the specific program guidelines and then just the general grant guidelines that apply to all of our grants for additional eligibility information. So all of our grants will require a project start date and end date. And your start date will be the point at which your project is set in motion, which would include activities such as auditions and rehearsals, advertising, payment of any fees or contracts, ordering and paying for supplies. So you cannot spend any money before the project start date. If you would absolutely need to, for instance, you would have to make a deposit on a contract for an artist before that start date, then you could not include that amount in your grant budget. And your start date should not be the date of your first activity or event, because then that would not allow you to spend any of that necessary money leading up to that point or do any of your planning. You'll also need to choose your project end date and allow a little time to wrap things up after your activities are completed. So deadlines and start dates, we've already passed our first deadline for the year, but our second deadline for round 2 is coming up December 12th for projects starting February 15th or later. And then we've got one more deadline this year, March 20th, projects starting May 15th or later. So if you're thinking about a project going on next fall, you might want to think of applying in March already to do things, some planning or spending money that might take place during the summer for events in early fall. Just to note that all applications must be submitted by 4:30 p.m. on the deadline date. Our system will not allow you to submit if it's past 4:30, so just to be aware of that. For your project, you must have a project director and an authorizing official. The project director is the person who will be most directly responsible for the project. That may or may not be the grant writer. And then you'll also need an authorizing official, which will be probably the president or treasurer or other person from your organization who has authorizing power. The project director and the authorizing official cannot be the same person. And both of them will need to sign the application, the contract, and your final report for the project. If your organization does not have official 501c3 nonprofit status, or they are not an official unit of city, county, or state government, you will need to find an organization that is one of those things to act as your fiscal sponsor. And you'll need to have a signed agreement between your organization and the fiscal sponsor organization that spells out the relationship between the two of you, and you'll need to submit that agreement with your application. And then a representative from the fiscal sponsor organization will need to sign your application contract and final report. So the fiscal sponsor would then receive the grant funds for you, and they will be legally responsible for the management and completion of the project. Again, any questions so far? I still have not seen anything come through in the chat window. I'll just wait for a few moments here to see if anyone has any questions. All right, not seeing any questions yet. I will move on and we'll take a look at our website here. So there are a couple of places on our website where you can get to our online grant system. One is right on the home page. There's this box for grants and a button for log in that'll take you to our grant system. Otherwise, if you click on grants here, we're going to go look at the page for art projects. Each of the grant program pages has this apply now button that will also take you to the grant system. And I'm just going to show you all the resources that are available to you on the website here. So each of these pages has the guidelines for the specific program, and then the general grant guidelines that applies to all of our grant programs. So you'll want to make sure to look at both of these, since we just kind of did an overview of those today. Here are the application questions in a Word document format. Some people like to work in that first and then paste their answers into the grant system afterwards. So you could use that if you wanted to. Here's the budget form, which is also available within the application. The evaluation criteria are listed here for the program, and there's also a video tutorial for the online grant system. And then all of the important deadlines and dates for the different rounds are listed here, as well as if you'd like to sign up for another one of our webinars. But for now, we will go into the grant system. If you already have an account, you can just log in here, or if you do not, you can create a new account. If you're not sure, you can contact us and we can let you know if someone from your organization already has an account, and we can get that figured out for you. But I am going to log in here. So if you already have an account, you'll come to your applicant dashboard, and then you would click on apply here. If you are just creating an account, you will come directly to this apply page, and then this is the list of all of the available grant programs, and you would find the one that you want. If you just want to preview the application before starting anything, you can click there to preview, but we are ready to start an application, so we're going to click here and apply when we're looking at the art projects application. So you'll need a name for your project, and you can put in the amount that you're requesting. You probably will want to wait to do this until after you filled out your budget. Again, there are links to those guidelines, the questions in a Word document. Here's just a reminder, we have kind of a large character limit for our narrative fields in case you happen to have a lot to say on one of the questions, but really our reviewers appreciate short, concise answers. So please do not feel like you need to come anywhere near using up all of those characters. And again, here is that evaluation score sheet that our reviewers will use. And it's a good thing to look at that to see what they're looking at when they are scoring your application. So you will describe your project, filling in your start and end dates, putting in information about public events related to your project. It's important to have all of the specific details about your event here because we use this information to post events on our area arts calendar that's on our website. And again, if your organization has even non-grant events going on, please email us and we will post those on our calendar. You're asked questions about your planning process, what you're going to do for your publicity, and then for your budget, you will click here to download an Excel budget form to fill out. And there are 2 samples here that are already filled out and have some instructions on them. One, if you're requesting less than the maximum amount, and then another one if you're requesting more than the maximum amount. It shows a little different information on how to fill out that cash match section, but I'll just open one of them here so you can see what that looks like. So this is the sample one that's already filled out. So it tells you, so you'll fill out all of your expenses here, and it helps to put in a lot of these details. So you'll put in kind of as much detail here as you have room for, and this will add this up for you, all of your expenses. And then you'll put in if you've got ticket income and other income that you're expecting. Here you can put in if it's anticipated or received already. And then based on what your expenses are, it'll calculate the minimum cash match that you need. And then if you need to make up some more difference by kicking in a little of your own organization cash if the ticket income and other sponsorships or something weren't already enough. And then it just reminds you how much you can request. So here it'll calculate for you based on what your expenses were for this amount. Your request cannot exceed $44.78, which is 80% of the total cash cost, or $7,000, which is the max amount, whichever is less. So the form really kind of guides you in filling it out and what your request amount can be. So these instructions are here on the sample form, and the actual one that you fill out will be blank, but we'll still do the calculations for you. So you'll download that blank form, fill it out, save it, and then when you're ready, you'll click here to upload and then just choose from wherever you had saved that to upload that. And then if there were any details that you want to talk about that didn't fit into that spreadsheet, you can put that in the narrative. If you had an equipment item that is going to cost more than $500, or a labor thing, again, more than $500, you'll need to provide 2 bids for that. You've got a place to upload those, information about your tickets. Then this next section, this artistic quality and merit section, is pretty much the most important part of your application and is worth the most in the scoring process. So this is where you describe what artists are involved and provide samples of their work. So here you'll describe the artists, or if you're performing something, why did you choose these pieces of music or this play to perform. You'll need resumes for the artists. And then here's the section where you'll have samples of their work. There are 3 quite large upload fields. Here are some guidelines for the different mediums of work. If you're doing images, you'll probably want to combine images into a PDF in order to be able to submit multiple images. Just a note to not include links in these description fields, as the reviewers cannot access them at all here. They can't even copy them to paste them. There are separate website fields below here where you can put websites or links to YouTube, which is a good place for audio and video samples. This next section has a bunch of questions pertaining to the impact your project will have on the participants and audience. Some audience numbers. This next section is on how you will be reaching the underserved in your community. You'll also need to have an outcome evaluation plan, which includes goals for your project. So what kinds of changes do you expect to come about from this project? And if you're having trouble coming up with goals, or how are you going to measure whether you've achieved your goals or not, there's a little sheet here that kind of walks you through some questions about what kinds of changes do you expect to see, and what kinds of ideas for methods to measure. So you need at least one goal and then a plan for being able to measure. A lot of people do surveys. Other people choose to kind of do really informal interviews of attendees during the event. If you have an evaluation tool like a survey that you're using, you can upload that here. You'll have to answer some questions about your organization, about its history, constituents, board members. If your organization is not an official government unit like a city, there are some questions about your annual finances that you'll need to answer. Then we just need to collect some data about your organization. And for all of these, there are just some codes you'll need to look at. So you'll just click the link, and it's just a list of codes to choose from. So you'll just look at the code and then just enter it here. And then finally is some contact information. So here's where you'll enter your information about the project director, authorizing official, and then if you are using a fiscal sponsor, then here's where you can enter that information. And the fiscal sponsor agreement, you can upload that here. We'll need to have your 501c3 status letter. If you're using a fiscal sponsor, you would put their 501c3 status letter here. And then finally, your electronic signatures. To save your application, you'll click here. If you're finished, you'll submit. We're just going to save for now. So you'll notice it tells you these questions have not been answered. So it will not let you submit if there's something required that you're missing here, which is good. We're going to click here to go back to your dashboard, which is kind of your home page. So you'll see now here's this one that we started listed here. So if you need to go back in, you click right here to edit. And then if you receive your grant, this is your same place where you're going to go back to find your contract and your final report. You'll go right back to here to edit. I'm just going to also take us into the Art Legacy Project grant briefly to just show you there's just a couple additional questions. Otherwise, they are very similar. The two questions, one is the legacy level qualification. So you just have to kind of make the case, why is this project a legacy level project? How will it leave an arts legacy? And then under impact, sustainable arts impact. What will be happening 5 years from now in regard to the arts as a result of this project? What makes it sustainable? How will it be maintained? Do you have plans to capitalize on the project in future events or activities? So those are the only two questions that are different for the Art Legacy project. Otherwise, all of the other questions are the same as the art project. Any questions about the application? I will give you some time to do that, and in the meantime, I'm going to go back to my presentation here. All right, I still don't see any questions, so I'll continue. Here are just some tips to think about as you're getting started. It's a really good idea to just start early before the deadline to make sure you have time to gather everything you need, like those work samples, and to find your 501c3 status letter, just to get all that paperwork together, and also to get any questions answered ahead of time if you need to contact our office. Also good to make sure you read all those guidelines carefully. We talked about a lot today, but it was really an overview, so make sure you check those. Read all of the questions fully. A lot of them you might have seen briefly had more than one part to them. So make sure to answer all the parts of each question. It's good to keep your answers clear and concise. We are grant reviewers often have a lot of grants to read. So if you can keep things brief while answering the questions fully, that's good. It's also really good to assume that the grant reviewers don't know anything about your organization or your project, because they're told to just go by whatever is in the application. Even if they personally might know something about your organization or have attended one of your events, they're kind of told to just stick with what's in there. And we have different reviewers every time, even if your organization has applied before. It's very likely that they that there will be a reviewer who has not heard of your organization before. And also good to have someone proofread your application. I do see now I've got a couple of questions coming through. If you have an art legacy project that will require some form of maintenance, like sealing or cleaning of some sort, can the expense be included in the grant proposal, i.e. outdoor sculptures and murals? I think if you have like an initial sealing, to have that expense in there, I think would be good. But if you're planning to have it cleaned in 5 years, I don't know that that would be necessarily in the grant proposal. We might want to see that we will fundraise in 5 years to have a cleaning of the sculpture, or we will search out a particular donor for ongoing maintenance for this. So it's a good idea to call us to talk about your project before starting an application, just to make sure you're applying under the right program, or if you have an eligibility question, or even if you're pretty sure that you are eligible and in the right program, sometimes just talking it through, you can come up with some more ideas. It's just a good idea to talk with us ahead of time, or call us as you're filling out your application and you run into questions. If you're not really sure, what did you really mean by this question? Another thing that is really helpful, we can review your application before you submit it up to 2 weeks before the deadline. So if you feel like you've kind of got your application in a good place, you can give us a call or send us an email and say, I think I mostly have this, can you take a look? And we can read through it and say, oh, it looks like you're missing something, or you could go a little more in this direction. We can do that. If it's a little past that 2 weeks before the deadline, it's possible we could look at it, but we can't guarantee that. But you can always check. So once you submit your application, SMOC staff will review it for eligibility and completeness, and then it will go on to a panel of individuals from the SMOC region who will discuss and score the applications based on the criteria for that program. And then after that, the SMOC board will approve funding based on the recommendations of the grant review panel. So SMOC staff does not have any say in whether your application gets funded or not. We're really here as advocates for you to help you have the best application that you can. So the criteria for the art projects and art legacy projects that the panel will be using, they will look at the artistic quality and merit of the project. And like we talked about in the application, this is the most important one. You can get up to 18 points for that. Then they will also be looking at what is the impact on the participants and the audience. That is worth 8 points. They'll look at how well are you reaching the underserved for 5 points. The ability to accomplish the project. How's your planning? Is your budget reasonable? Do you have the appropriate amount of publicity? That's worth 5 points. and then that outcome evaluation plan, which is your goals and how you plan to measure whether you've met them for 2 points. And you will need to pass each of those criteria in order to be eligible for funding. If your grant is awarded, you'll need to complete an online contract within 30 days. And then after you complete that contract, you'll receive 80% of your grant award before your start date. And then you'll receive the remaining 20% of your grant award after your project and final report have been completed. SMOC's financial assistance must be acknowledged on all publicity and promotional materials using the credit line that will be included in your grant contract. And you may also need to include the Minnesota Legacy logo in your publicity, depending on the source of the funding for your particular grant. The credit and posters and logos will be sent to you and will also be available on our website. And you'll need to complete an online final report within 60 days of your project end date. It's a good idea to look through the final report when you start your project so you know what information you'll need to gather, like attendance, costs, outcomes related to the goals from your application. Your final report is assigned to you in the grant system as soon as your grant is awarded, so you'll be able to look at it as soon as that grant is awarded to you in that same dashboard area that we were looking at. Any more questions? If you'd like to contact us about anything else, we are in the office from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. Where somebody is usually here over the lunch hour, but we don't guarantee it. Our phone number is there and email. And thank you for joining us today. And I will stay on here and unmute everyone in case there's anything else you'd like to talk about. So thank you.